Hello, Starseeds, and welcome to Magical Moonday, Monday, April 1st, also known as April Fool's Day, but I like to look at it as the true new year, I guess, cosmologically. So welcome all of you to Neurolinguistic Astrology Live / the Rachel C. Project podcast. So today's episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about the importance of myth as it relates to things like astrology, right? So when you're looking at astrology, I look at it as a classification system. I'm not as actually let's roll it back. I think you can actually use astrology to make predictions, right? You can, but ultimately that's not necessarily what I use it for. I like to look at it as more of a navigation system, which is why I've said before that astronaut translates to star sailor, and so from that perspective we can look at astrology as a way of navigating our way through the game of life. So without further ado, let's take a look at the chart of the everlasting now, and we will use that as a basis point by which to discuss myths and mythology and why that's important in this context, especially from the fact that stories are important. They're how we generate context. And so if you say, like, actually let's do this, it's easier when you have a visual explanation for things. So this is the chart of the everlasting now, aka the chart of the moment, and you can see all of the planets and their particular positions on the chart. If you've been to any of my astrology chats, you know that ultimately, like when you took your first breath into this existence, this chart is yours and only yours. So if a baby was born at, when did I run this chart? 11:29 p.m. So even if we were to refresh it, 11:38, you'll see that the planets have shifted a little bit. The moon is very quick, and more importantly, what we're looking at here, the rising sign, the ASC symbol also means your rising sign, your ascendant sign. So that is very much attributed to your specific time of birth. And if we think about the degrees in the wheel, it's every 2 degrees, I believe. So it's quick, and your very specific time of birth matters. Now, if you were to get your birth chart reading, if you were to get one from me, you can get it from Sacred Soma. It's your Starseed Astro Blueprint, your natal chart report. It's $40 for a custom report based on your birth time and all of that kind of stuff. So what you will receive in 24 to 48 hours, based on the questionnaire that is filled out once you add this to your cart, you'll receive a PDF of your personal astrological blueprint. Now, anyone who gets this, if you want to get a reading with me, any first time reading is $80 and any time after that is $50. So this is typically something we would go over in a first report. So if you get this first and then you want to get a reading after, the reading's only another additional $40. So I think it's a good deal just for you to get some perspective perhaps on where you relate to what's going on in the skies right now. So what we would do in a second reading as opposed to a first reading, the first one would be like, hey, this is your main natal report. We would look at it just similar to like how we would look at this. And this is why I like doing these chats, because your chart, your personal one, is actually very significant, and it holds a lot of intel about you, and not everyone's benevolent, so you just have to be a little careful about who knows what about your chart. And I know it's when I first found out about my own chart, you want to share, and I've been involved in like the Venus circle, and Sasha, if you're watching this, it's been really lovely to talk to other women especially who have similar aspects to me, like my Venus. Actually, let's go through all the planets as it stands in the chart of the everlasting now right now, and that will be a way of kind of learning as well our own personal placements and how you may find that relevant to yourself. So what you could also do is, in a reading, as I was trying to say before but I cut myself off, if you did a secondary reading of synastry, you can do synastry between anything that has an astrology, so events, movies, other people, of course. But in this case, we could also do a birth chart reading and then do a synastry against the chart of the now and see what angles or aspects. And that's kind of what we call like transits, where certain planets are making certain transits or movements across your own chart. All right, so let's go through each of the planets, and then I'll get into the myths of each of the planets as they are playing against each other in this cosmic stage, which I like to call the zodiac wheel. It's like an allegory for a larger stage that's set for all of these different thought forms and entities energetically to interplay. And I always like to tell you guys, like, you are all of the signs. We just have certain inclinations that are based on what the planetary alignments and the different angles are that are made. So what we have right now is we are fully in Aries season, the first sign of the zodiac. And if you see here, just a quick learning moment, the rising sign being in Scorpio, it lines up the chart so that the first house ends up in Sagittarius. And so in this case, if someone were to be born right now, Aries is in the 4th house. So that's all just why your birth time is important, because it lines up the rest of your chart. In the stars right now, we do have the sun is in Aries. We have the north node, the lunar north node, which is also known as the head of the dragon. It dictates destiny. And so in a more collective chart reading, which is what I'm doing right now, it speaks to universal destiny, the destiny of all of us. And that being in Aries is definitely that whole warrior call, the inner warrior, the spiritual warrior, the warrior within, the one that has to stand up and do what is right, even when it's not easy. That energy is chock full in the cosmos, in what we have to, in the energies that we have to work with, to pull in to our own life story. And so looking here to Chiron, it looks like a little bit of a key is also in Aries. There's quite a few astrologers. I'll leave some links about the significance of these 3 luminaries hanging out in Aries all together. It is a warrior call. It is an inner pull towards standing up for yourself. Aries is the I am. It's the idea of coming into form and realizing that you have to be an independent you, even while you are working within a group, and even while this is a collective chart. We are having a collective human experience, but we are also an individual that is required to do your individual thing in order for that larger storyline to work. So that is Aries. What we also have in the sky is we have, what do I want to do next? I want to look at Venus, because I was originally talking about the Venus circle I was involved with, and looking at Venus as, and tracking yourself against Venus, which has a different type of not solar cycle. It moves at a different rate around the sun. I guess it is a solar cycle. The track goes, we're all moving around the sun. Venus moves, I think her cycle is like 18 months around the sun. And so you can end up with a Venus return. And also she has her own stages as it comes to her orbit, whether or not she's a morning star or evening star. I am not the expert in that. I will hopefully have my friend and lovely astrologer Sasha on a show to discuss Venus a little bit more in depth, and how we can use it to empower ourselves in our relationships, and how we're able to have more intimate, fruitful types of relationships with not just our lovers, but with anyone or anything we have relationships with. So Venus right now is in Pisces, very close to Neptune. This is very interesting because Neptune is also known as the higher octave of Venus. So where Venus rules love, beauty, even war in some degrees, right? It's the way I explained it before when I was talking about the goddesses of love and war, was that you will go to war for something that you love. Even the Battle of Troy, like this, bringing this back to myth and story and legends and all of that really juicy stuff. I was obsessed with myth when I was a young girl. I had many books that I would get from the library, which ironically enough, I live next to a library now, and I'll be doing a comic book reading later on this evening in the wee hours to share that with you all. But to tie this all into why myth is important is that to get meaning behind each of these signs is a matter of the stories that are behind them. Venus is, of course, they made her marry, Zeus made her marry Hephaestus, who's the, in some regards, they say that Hephaestus, the smith, he's the blacksmith of the gods. He makes all of their special weaponry and special magical tools and the forge. And there is a relationship between Hephaestus and Taurus. And I kind of get that because Zeus made Venus / Aphrodite in that case marry Hephaestus, because Venus was being all like, I'm so beautiful and lovely, and everyone was just getting distracted because everyone wanted to get with her, and she was just, because Hermes got with her, and so did, and Mars is also considered Venus's favorite lover. And speaking of Mars, the planet of war and action and drive, if Venus is how you love and relationships and art and beauty, Mars is how you achieve those things, the actions required that in order to create those things to get what it is that you want. And where's Mars? Here, yes. So Mars is also in Pisces. The Venus and Mars were much closer before, and there was a conjunction which started a whole new cycle in terms of the male and female energetic relationships that we have both within ourselves and the ones that we also expressed externally. They're not too far apart. Venus is closer to Neptune here and clasping to Aries. So this part of the chart is very spicy. This where the 12th becomes the first house, where destruction is required for rebirth, where everything breaks down. This space between ending and beginning is a very juicy place for Neptune, which rules dreams and is, as I said, a higher octave of Venus in the sense of the more collective understanding of themes of art and beauty and all of those things. And art itself has a lot packed into it. Like, where does art come from, right? Where does inspiration come from? Venus is like that actual personal representation of it, and Neptune is like this higher mind thinking way about those themes. And also remember, Venus is probably the most benevolent luminary in the chart, but nothing's ever completely, there's always a shadow side, right? I don't want to say like bad or evil. It's just another side to gifts when you're looking at houses and things like this, and attributes. That's the word I'm looking for when you're looking at different attributes. Other things to look for here is Pisces, which looks like a sickle, and Saturn, which looks like a sickle because that's the relation to Chronos and time. And with time comes this idea of death and being a teacher. So Saturn gets a bad rap, but there are very important lessons, especially when it comes to discipline and like self-control, that are wrapped up in Pisces' lessons and Saturn stuff. Let's see. This is where it all stands. So in Pisces right now, Venus and Neptune very close together in this very like liminal space before we find our identity. So if I were to analyze that and do an interpretation in terms of my lens, Neptune is Poseidon, trident, right? And we think about the seas with Poseidon, and I've been hearing a lot of stories lately about talking about the Odyssey, and a lot of that is like Poseidon wanted to show Odysseus that to be humble to the gods, right? Like, and that's more of like a metaphorical kind of thing, to have just humbleness to things, and even creativity, creation, art. I finally freaking finished writing book 3 of the Dragon Warriors. Like, truly, it's in an editing process right now, but I'm now in the phase right now where it's based on real people, right? So I'm like highlighting all of the parts that I need feedback on and sending that out. But in that mode, like even me reading back what I've even written myself. They're like my own words, and sometimes I'm just like, holy cow, I'm so happy I wrote that down, because it would have just been gone. Or like dance freestyles, where I film them very often now, not necessarily post them, but just so I have them, because it's a moment. It's like a moment where you catch whatever is floating in the grand logos of creativity, and you bring that down into earth. And I think that us as artists, I think everyone's an artist. Your life is a work of art. Your life is a story. So as artists, cosmic artists, we also, like Odysseus, need to be aware of the humbleness as to where inspiration comes from. We're not like a self-contained thing. We are connected to the all. And so, you know, when even I think of like yoga, right? And the movements that come from yoga, like, can you copyright a downward dog? No. Like, can you copyright a pirouette or a turn or any of these kinds of things? No, because just because you were the first person to like put a name to it, and even if we think of dance moves, like, yeah, just like a pirouette, you can have like a bunch of different types of pirouettes, and you couldn't patent that. So there's a lesson there in terms of these are all like elements that all of us as artists are able to collaborate and freely piece together so that you create something brand new out of what has already come before. And that's the whole idea of like life's a remix. Everything's a remix. Nothing is completely net new, but it is net new. And that's the paradox of it being new, and the alchemy of baking a cake, right? It ends up being more than the sum total of its parts. So yeah, I just, oh yes, the last two things I didn't talk about, and then we're going to go into some of the aspects, and then I'm going to go into some myth stuff and just give you some foreshadowing as to what to expect this week as it comes to mythology and storytelling and some analysis and the launch of the Cosmic Comic Book Club, where we're going to do some analysis of some of the more juicy, deeper comics or graphic novels, because they are a very unique medium. And I like to call them, they are the modern myth. They are the new myth of this generation as it stands right now. Okay, so Capricorn has the moon. The moon is currently in Capricorn. It looks like there's a grand trine happening here at the midheaven. And grand trines typically take place in a particular element, so it would be an earth grand trine. But remember, this is a chart of the moment itself, and so not specifically tagging it concretely to a being or a specific event, whereas where these points would probably be a little bit more emphasized, and the aspects that they make would also be more emphasized. So we're not going to necessarily look at that right now. We're going to instead look at Pluto, my friend Pluto, who is still just very, very close to it just came into Aquarius. We have this whole time of Pluto being in Aquarius in 2024. It's going to move back into Capricorn for a little bit and then stay in Aquarius. I don't want to say permanently, but it's going to be for a much longer time than Pluto's ever has been in signs before. Okay, so let's look at the aspects. I'm just going to make sure that all of my stuff was right. Yep, the sun is in 12 degrees Aries. The moon is 13 degrees Capricorn. Mercury is in retrograde, just so you guys all know. All the stuff happening in the cosmos and everyone preparing for the eclipse. I think we all just so you know, we also have a Mercury retrograde in Aries. But I also think Mercury rules thought, communication, memory. So you are more likely to be absent-minded, more likely to forget your keys in places. I look at it as like a time to be more internal communication, or just be more aware of you're more likely to be misunderstood in a Mercury retrograde. So it's good to take the extra time to take a step back and curate or refine your messaging before you put it out there. That's just some advice during a retrograde. Venus and Mars still in Pisces. They're not as tight in a conjunction as they were before, but still those themes are going to be the same. Pisces rules dreams. It is ruled by Neptune. Neptune is currently in Pisces, which is the sign. It is the ruler of that sign. So dream energy, as it has been for the last couple of weeks, is very much emphasized. We do have the New Year energy right now, so it's a lot of how should I put this? Like you have to sometimes let go of old dreams, or sometimes dreams that have been implanted in you and they weren't really even yours to begin with, for you to take a step back and reclaim the ones that are truly yours. And working through all of that, it's not an easy thing to kind of deduce, because there's so much noise and like in everything, even with stories. And this is a good segue into why myth is important, and personal sacred stories, your personal mythos. What stories build up and make up your own personal belief model and how you navigate yourself through time space. We have a stellium. Okay, so this makes this is something we can actually look at because it doesn't consider the midheaven or the ascendant. So stellium is when you have four, I don't know if it's 3 or 4 or more, but it's when you have a conglomerate, or a gathering of luminaries in the same sign. And so there is Aries energy, and we are currently having the sun in Aries here too. So everything I said about warrior activation, whatever that looks like to you in your own personal battles, that energy is there for you. Trust yourself. Be who you really are. You have the courage to be who you truly are. That's what's needed right now. The grand trine we're not going to look at too much, just because, as I said, the midheaven is a mathematical point kind of based on your birth time. And I personally don't think it is as relevant in a bigger collective reading. Same thing goes for the kite. But we do have a multiple planet square. So, why do they call it a square here if it's just like this? All right, but it's in the same element. I'll have to look into this, if that's like, why is this considered a square? But the moon being in Capricorn, oh, okay, because there's the same modality. So if you think about modalities, Aries, Capricorn, and Cancer are all initiatory first signs. So this ends up being a square because you have all this energy in Aries, and they're both initiatory signs. So it's like a little bit of competition in regards to where you're placing your energy. And that is a great segue to why myth is important in regards to this kind of interpretation and storytelling. Because if you say, okay, the moon is squaring Aries, what does that mean? Or the moon is squaring multiple luminaries in Aries. And so let's just take a look at the stories and myths that power each of the signs. Aries is ruled by Mars. It's the first sign of the zodiac. It rules the head. It's very much about identity. It is I am. It's about forging your own self-identity. That's that. There's a lot of energy there right now. Capricorn is also known as a sign of, it's also a cardinal sign. I think we forget sometimes that Cancer is also cardinal. And so that has initiatory qualities. It's very much going to be like, I'm going to be first, right? And so I feel like the square here is perhaps well, actually, that's kind of like what's going on with the eclipse too. You have a competing aspect of the moon ruling your inner emotions, your inner child, your inner mother, all of that stuff, kind of like squaring up against this idea of like presenting in your outer shell. So that's interesting. Let me go into that more. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. The moon being in Capricorn is a much more practical moon. So even though the emotions, like you think of the moon, you think of emotions as being like, it's changing here and it's over here too. But Capricorn, I relate to like that little mountain goat that made it up to the top of the mountain. You're like, how the heck did you get there? But it's because he was working when no one else was looking. So there's a lot of power here where your emotions can be used towards your work. Like if you love your work, then you're not really working. But yeah, so there's like a relationship there that can be worked with Capricorn. That might go up against Aries in the sense of sometimes you have to do what's right, and what you're doing for the self and what you like in your like grand plan, or what you were trying to set out for yourself in terms of goals and ambitions, doesn't line up to what your heart, or not your heart rather, emotions in mind and heart, they can sometimes be the same, but they're not always the same. But it can come up against what emotionally you're feeling. And this is a key, right? Because our emotions can be easily, I don't want to say played with, but they can change. The moon is ever changing. It's like when you watch a movie and you cry during a movie and you're like sad because of it, you could just change right after you leave the movie and get out of it. But in that moment, you're sad because that's like our emotions. They're very impacted by things like that, like tides and waves. It's changing and moving and mutable. Having that in an earth cardinal sign grounds it. Whereas having Aries with the sun, it's kind of like this impetuous motion and moving forward action, not necessarily thinking it through. So there's this squaring off against of, this might be, as I think of it as like right now, as a welcome catch, because all of this is in a very impetuous, forward, fiery sign as a collective, but we have some opportunity here to have an emotional check on ourselves, to think through and be a bit more practical about our emotions and look at what is triggering us, what is making us sad, what is making us feel this way, and line that up with our bigger goals. And then, so even though it's squaring, what it can do there is provide power and give us better decision making abilities when it comes to following the courage of being who we are, because we have to dissect and disseminate through all of our cells, all of our emotional triggers, all of these things that maybe happened in the past to find out, okay, this is me, this is who I am, and I'm going to have the courage to stand in that and be exactly who it is that I want to be. So that takes care of that in terms of the Moonday, Monday show, in terms of looking at the chart of the everlasting now and then overlaying that with myth and personal myth and sacred stories of self. It's important to note though as well, when it comes to the luminaries, that there's a differentiation between, I'm going to use the moon as an example because we have an eclipse coming up and there's a lot of emphasis on lunar energy. The idea that the moon is essentially going to come in front of the sun and block that is a matter of like our subconscious self is going to come to the surface. And it's good to be aware of that so that we're not caught off guard in situations where that's not a good thing to kind of have to deal with. We need to have the space to kind of deal with and sift through our emotions. And the moon is, if we think of myth, Artemis or Diana is the goddess of the hunt, and she is associated with the moon. She's a virgin goddess. She's an archer. She also is a protector of wild animals and is, in the Greek mythology, associated with women, maidenhood, all that kind of stuff. Important to note, I'm using the Greek one as an example because there's other lunar goddesses as well. You can check out my other video of all the lunar goddesses throughout the cultures and throughout the world. I will leave a link to that in this video and probably the follow-up. But there's the personification of it, like Luna as a goddess, the moon herself as a particular energy, as having a Manitou. And then there's Diana, which is said to be represented by the moon. Another example of this is Helios, which is the sun god. He has the chariot that brings the sun across the sky. That's where the myth of Icarus comes from, Icarus flew too close to the sun. I forget who Helios' son was, but Helios' son wanted to get a wish from his father. And I will leave this chat on this story because I need to get ready for my comic book read later. But Helios' son made his father promise him to fulfill his promise. I don't know if it was his birthday or something like that, but he's like, hey, you have to, please, father, promise me to fulfill my promise no matter what it is that I ask of you. And Helios is like the sun, the god who carries the sun across the sky is like, okay, fine, sure, I'll do it. So he's like, let me ride your horses or take the sun across the sky with the horses, because there's a fleet of horses that drive the chariot. Helios is like, oh no, I don't want to do that, but he made a promise, and so his word was his word. So he gave his son the horses to drive across the sky, but he was not trained, right? And this is going back to Saturn lessons, like experience, youthful. I remember being like this, right? You think you know because you read about it, or you have the internet, or it's so much different doing things in practice. The amount of times that I've seen a dance and I'm like, oh, that looks easy, and then I try to learn it, I'm like, this is not easy, this is very hard. So Helios' son takes the chariot, takes the reins, the horses, and this is for anyone who knows about riding horses, they can sense you, right? These horses are aware that Helios' son is afraid of them. They're aware that this is not really their master, and they can probably get away with some ish. So the horses go off, like do their own thing, and I think they end up, they get out of control. So the sun ends up almost like scorching the earth, because he can't, it's funny, the son of Helios and the sun, because of his inability, like it starts to burn the earth, and Zeus like, what the heck, throws a thunderbolt, kills the sun. So it's kind of a sad story. There's a lot of those tragedies, but the lesson there is that the roles we were meant to play, they will only become available to us when we are meant to. If we circumvent those things by like doing these little tricks and stuff, you'll get what you want, but it's to your detriment. So we have to be aware of when it's good to risk, and being bold and brave and pushing through with things. But there is foolhardiness, and that is the lesson too of April Fool's Day, that having the courage to play the fool, but also there is foolhardiness, and just the balance and that dance that we have between all of those things and all the different aspects of ourselves. And so that truly takes care of why myth is important, and through the lens of Neurolinguistic Astrology for this edition of Moonday, Magical Monday. So I hope you learned something, Starseeds, and if you like my content, please be sure to give me a like, share, and subscribe, and I will catch all of you in the next video. Have a good one.